Good evening, everybody. This is Anita. I'm glad you were able to join me tonight for our kickoff of our specialist language arts training for the spring. This is our first training event together, so we've got about half of our group on tonight's webinar, and the other half is going to join me tomorrow for the webinar then. So hopefully you've got your control panel up, and we'll walk through a couple things there real quick to get oriented, and then we'll get going. So tonight we're going to be doing a couple different things. If you're not 100% familiar with GoToMeeting, you will either see this large expanded control panel here on your left, or you might see just this little strip of icons. If you click the orange arrow at the top, it'll toggle you back and forth between the bigger one and the smaller one. Both are fine. The microphone icon, if it's red, that means you're muted and nobody can hear you. And it looks like, just a quick survey, yeah, you guys all muted yourselves, which means you're all experts and wonderful, and I love you because that simplifies life a lot. Cuts down on a lot of background noise. You don't have to worry about your dog barking in the background and all that stuff. And then if you want to speak, and there will be times tonight where you will, you just click that microphone until it turns green, and that means you're live and everybody can hear you. And we will use that occasionally. And there's also a chat box where you can type and then hit send, and it will send your questions to me. So that is also an option if you don't have a mic. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, can hear my voice. And if so, and you've got a control panel on your screen, then we're all good. So if you've got a problem, throw it in the question box, and I'll get to you here in just a sec as we get started. So why don't, let's check the mics and just kind of see how we're doing. If you don't have a microphone, that's totally fine. You can use the typing box in your control panel. But if you do have a mic, I'm just going to ask you guys to call your name and just let you say hi real quick and tell us what program you're from. And that way we can all just make sure everybody is working, okay? So, Pat, I see you out there. Pat, can you introduce yourself for us real quick?
Hi, this is Pat Malarski, and I'm at Triton, GED. I teach the language arts too.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nancy, are you out there? Do you have a mic?
Yes, I do have a mic. I'm here, and I also teach at Triton, and I teach the language arts either level 3 or 4.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hey, Shannon, do you have a mic out there tonight?
I think I do.
You do. I hear you.
Okay, perfect. Perfect.
Great.
All right. Yeah, I teach at Waubonsie Community College. I started teaching ESL there, but for the past few sessions, I have been doing the HSE language arts classes as well.
Good. It's been a little bit since I've seen you, so I'm glad to have you back with us.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited.
Excellent. Good. And Tara, do you have a mic tonight as well?
Yes, I do. Hello,
Great.
everyone.
Hi.
Hi, I teach at Waubonsie Community College also. I'm typically in a language arts classroom, HSC type classroom, but for the last couple of semesters, I've been teaching in our ICAPS program.
Mm-hmm.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I'll bet. Challenging, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's been great. Looking forward to this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And Jenny, do you have a mic tonight too?
I do have a mic.
Hey.
Long time.
I know.
I'm also at Waubonsie Community College. I'm currently teaching in the pre-HSE program.
Wonderful. Great. Glad to have you. And it looks like there might be somebody else out there lurking that doesn't have a name. Is there somebody else out there? I'm just making sure because there's somebody who is like halfway logged in. Oh, there's Stephanie. I'll give Stephanie just a sec. Looks like she just logged in, so I'll give her a minute so she can introduce herself. Okay. Hi, Stephanie. We were just doing introductions real quick. If you have a microphone, Stephanie, and you want to unmute yourself, you could say hi to us real quick if you've got a mic. If not, you can... Oh, there you are. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. We were just saying who we are and where we teach as we get started tonight. If you don't mind introducing yourself.
Oh, sure. I'm Stephanie Crespo, and I teach adult night school at District 211.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, great. Well, I'm thrilled that all of you are on. And even though you might not know all of each other yet, we are about half of our language arts specialist cohort for this spring in the North. And you'll meet the other half of the group when we see each other face to face. And we'll become our own little critical friends group here. So let's jump in, and I want to give you guys just a little bit of information up front, and then we'll get into the kind of participatory part here. So remember, if you want to speak, make sure your mic is green. Otherwise, you might want to turn your mic red to mute yourself. I apologize for my cold, but I hope you can understand me okay. I just want to show you on the screen a quick review of the Instructional Staff Professional Pathway for ABE-ASE in Illinois Adult Ed. You all have completed this middle column of Standards Proficient and have got that credential earned and on your wall, I'm sure, right? And now you're moving on to the next column over, which is an optional role. The specialist credential is not required like the Standards Proficient is. This is for people who are going above and beyond. Either their program administrator has perhaps identified them and suggested that you go on so that they can use you and your expertise, or perhaps it's your choice to go on and improve your own PD and your own background, in which case both are great. I'm glad to have you. We'll be doing some training specifically for specialists. It will not be a repeat of Standards Proficient, although tonight will echo it, and then everything moving forward is all brand new tools, brand new skills that will be very program centered. The Standards Proficient material was very classroom centered, right? It was about your lessons you're preparing, your assignments, and your student work. The specialist training is very much about your broad program, how the program is implementing standards as a whole, and you will be used as the person who can advise the other staff in your program about how to proceed, mentoring them, observing them, working with them, evaluating resources, etc. So there's quite a lot going on in the specialist that I really enjoy. And just while we're on the page, if you're thinking ahead to master teacher, that credential we hope will roll out next fiscal year. So anyone who completes the specialist would then have the option, again, to move on to the next and final pathway if they chose to do so. So just wanted to orient us a little bit in where we are in the training series. So a quick list of maybe what specialists do. Again, this will vary from program to program. Very much depends on how your administrator sees the use of specialists, but there are three major areas that you see on the screen that specialists usually serve in, one of which is curriculum, whether it be in development or evaluating and adjusting and aligning current curriculum. Both of those are valid. Supporting other teachers, this is a biggie. Mentoring new teachers, doing training for newer teachers, maybe peer mentoring or peer coaching for newer or even long-term teachers. And then also providing observation and feedback on how well standards are being implemented. That is not an evaluative observation process. It is an observation as a researcher, as a what do I see? And it's more for programmatic information rather than teacher specific. And then the programmatic development, there might be content area committees or work groups that you might serve on that could be local, APC, or statewide. And then also ICCB often asks for special projects from the PD network, of which I am a part. And many times we will reach out to our trained specialists and ask them to serve on those groups, sometimes for small stipends, sometimes just for PD experience, but you will become one of those people in my pool, so to speak, that I can draw from for those future activities, again, if you choose. So that's some of what those potential responsibilities and tasks look like for specialists. And I just like for people to see that up front so they kind of have a frame for what we're doing in specialist training and why it's a little bit different from Standards Proficient, which again is very specific to the classroom and what happens with direct student contact. So just a quick note, you may have seen in the application for this training that the specialist credential has a handful of things for which you have to verify. One of them is that you have experience presenting, and that is something that I will give you more information on as we go forward. But just so you know, if you're thinking, oh, I've never presented at a conference or a workshop, that's totally fine. When you do in the future, which we hope that's something all specialists will do, your credential can be administered then. Local program staff trainings also counts for that as well. The 1 year of teaching, all of you have already, and the demonstrated knowledge of assessment practices comes from having completed the TABE 1112 iLearn course, which is mandated, so I'm sure all of you have already done it. The trainings are there that you'll see. And then the only other thing is the issue related to subject matter competency, which you see here on the page. This information that you see on your screen is in Canvas. It's all there. You can go to the page, it's near the bottom of the course, about verification for specialist credential, and you can look at it all there, read it at your leisure, ask me questions by email, anything you need. This is not something that has to be finished before we meet. It can be done anytime this semester before we meet for our final training. And before you receive your credential, it just has to be done. So I'm putting that out there just to remind you, hey, go into Canvas, take a peek at this chart again and make sure that you meet all the qualifications. And if you don't, you can email me and we can start chatting about that right now. Jenny asks a great question. She says, hey, I just presented at IASA last week. Does that count for presentation? Absolutely it does. You're going to scan the page of the booklet that has your name and your session title on it, and that's all we need, right? So it'll be something like that that will count as presenter experience. Great. So any questions about that, please feel free to check Canvas and then send me an email. So let's jump into what we're going to do tonight. And one of the first pieces of this training that has to do for specialists getting prepared to lead other teachers, prepared to move their departments forward in standards-based instruction, is revising a resource to improve its alignment. Now, we looked at our last Standards Proficient trainings at improving individual lessons, right? An individual lesson plan. Now we're talking broader about the entire resource as a whole. And the resources that are your program's kind of go-to books, the texts or websites that you tend to use all the time. The question is, how well aligned to the standards are they? And if they're not, what would we have to do to them to make them so? So this is going to be what we're going to tackle first. And part of the reason why we do this is what you see on your screen. When you do this activity as a group or with peers, not only are you deepening your understanding of the standards, but you're providing your instructors with resources that are better aligned. And that's one of the goals. And also by providing with this exercise of alignment, you're increasing buy-in from the other teachers. They will learn to see the value of having resources that are well aligned. So that's one of the key approaches of the standards, or excuse me, the specialist training that we're going to jump into tonight. So what we're going to do is look at the change agent, which is the catalog, the little magazine that you got in the mail. And you had some instructions about which article to read carefully and look at. Let's look together at the change agent lesson and that we looked at. It starts on page 22. It's 22 and 23 if you want to orient yourselves there. And we're going to look at a handful of things that should look super familiar to you on the screen right now. Things that come from Standards Proficient training: text complexity, vocabulary, text-dependent questions, knowledge and research building. So we're going to look and see how well this lesson, as a representative of the rest of the resource, how well it does. So just to frame our discussion, remember when we talk about being a critical friend, if it's been a while since you've been through training, I'll just remind you, Critical doesn't mean negative. It means vital, crucial, indispensable, meaning we need each other, right? So our critical friends, we are going to work together to improve this resource, and we're going to do so as a group by providing critical or really important change and recommendations together as a team. So you should have in front of you the Legalize Undocumented Immigrants article that starts on page 22. So 22, 23, and then you should have a hard copy of the Language Arts Lesson Revision template that was mailed with the resource. So I'm hoping that that's true for everyone. And if so, if you've got those two things in front of you, that's great. I will also have the revision template up on the screen and be working with it live, so you can also follow along that way on the screen as well. Okay, so those two things you'll need in front of you. So let's talk for a second about this revision template. We're going to throw our brains back to Standards Proficient. This should look familiar because it is the same document that we used to analyze a particular lesson. What we're going to do tonight is do the same thing, but we're going to do it with what is a bigger goal in mind, which is not just worrying about one lesson, but this lesson as a representative lesson of this whole tool called the change agent. In terms of, if we're going to make revisions to a lesson, what revisions would we make that would be necessary for the tool in general, for the resource in general? Okay, so that's kind of the broader thinking that we're going to use today. So what I want you to do is just take one quick peek. I'll give you a couple minutes of silence so you can glance at pages 22 and 23. There's several different sections of this lesson, right? You've got a text, there's a graphic with a bar graph, there's a cartoon, and then there's the Take It Further section, which has the question set. Okay, so I'll give you just a second to examine that. I'll pull up a document that we're going to work with, and then we'll get started. So I'll give you just a few minutes of silence. Okay, so hopefully everybody has kind of got reoriented to the lesson here. And what we're going to do is we're going to work through the lesson revision template together and talk about some of the big issues that we see, thinking again broadly in terms of what's going to need revision. Okay, so I'm going to pull open the lesson revision template. And one thing I want to show you on here is, I'm going to make it nice and big for us, hopefully be able to see. One thing that I did was I've put in a handful of I plugged in some things that I think probably you guys are going to say or might say, just to save the typing so I don't have to sit here and keyboard in front of you all night. But anything that you guys have that is not up here, we're going to make sure it gets added. So I will also save the document that we're going to work on as a group together tonight and put it in Canvas so you don't have to feel like you have to write down everything I'm doing that you see on the screen. That document will get saved and put in Canvas for you for later on. So let's start with learning goals. You can unmute yourself and just jump in vocally. You can type in the type feature and just write what you want to say, whatever you're comfortable with. But thinking about just these 2 pages as one complete lesson, what would you see as kind of the learning goals or the big ideas of what students are going to be asked to accomplish here?
Anita, do you mean like being able to read a graph? Is that what I'm
Yeah,
looking for?
absolutely. That's completely fine. I have, I'll show you what I have. I have this idea about looking at different media, right? To be able to understand a graph versus a cartoon versus text. Yeah, and Jenny puts it as visual literacy. Yeah, exactly. Great. That's one kind of big idea that the students are being asked to do. Can they interpret that graph? Can they read that cartoon? Perfect. Okay, guys, great. What else do we see there? Any other big ideas that students are being asked to accomplish here? Yeah, Nancy, absolutely. That visual literacy piece of interpreting the cartoon. Agreed. Anybody else? Think content as well. What's the big idea for content? What are students supposed to be learning? Yeah, Nancy, this whole idea about immigration in general, right? The content area of immigration is part of what they're learning. So absolutely. And as somebody just put, and sorry, it's scrolling out on me. Oh, Jenny, yes, it could be this issue of argumentation, right? Whether you want to call it an argument or a persuasive essay, understanding what an argument looks like. Absolutely right. Very good. And then I see, yes, I see research. Correct. The research options appear in the Take It Further section. And I think Tara mentioned, yeah, particularly tying the content to the legislative process. That's a part of what we see in that Take It Further section. Perfect. Excellent. Yeah. And even this idea about using evidence, right? Finding or using evidence. Some of the questions deal with that. Very good. Great. Okay, so we've got kind of these several different things happening in this one lesson, right? Which we know is okay. It's, we want to be careful not to overwhelm, but it's not too much. Remember, standards could be anywhere from 4 to 8 in one decent lesson, so this is fine. So original publisher, remember, this is just the idea that do we have everything we need? And yes, we do. We know what issue we've got. We know what title it is, etc. Anybody here figure out the intended instructional level? Do we know what the change agent is trying to do? What audience it's trying to reach? What level of student? Do you know from either research or experience? Who's the change agent trying to reach? Yeah, Tara says, well, clearly we're dealing with voting age people, so clearly it's for adults. Absolutely. Nancy's guessing maybe levels 4 to 6, right? Like somewhere in that range. Okay. Anybody else with a stab? Okay. Jenny says a little lower, maybe NRS 3, 4. Definitely still dealing with adults. Yeah, for sure. Great. I'll give you a little hint. If you've never been to the Change Agent's website, you might not know much about this. So yeah, Shannon, I think you and Jenny are kind of right on it. If you flip to the not the front page of the document of the book, but open to the inside cover where you see the From the Editor, and you'll notice this little to the left insert box, and it has some different information in there. That first paragraph called The Change Agent is the biannual publication right there. If you read through there a little bit, you'll see that the paper is designed for intermediate level English for speakers of other languages, ABE, GED, and adult diploma classes. So they're aiming for intermediate adult learners. So when you look at that in terms of our kind of NRS, yeah, we're not at the advanced levels yet. We're not at high school equivalency, but we're at that intermediate level for ABE. So the intended instructional level of the whole magazine is that. So by extension, we know that the intended instructional level of this particular lesson is that. Okay, so that's where we are. Wonderful. Okay, scroll down. We're going to skip number 4 just for a second. I want to look at number 5, this brief description of how the lesson would be used. How would you use this lesson where would it fall in your unit or your term? Where would you put it, and how would it fit?
Anita, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Where do I see the page with the numbers on it, like you're saying? I still just see LA Specialist Aurora cohort. Is that what everybody else just sees?
Are you?
Oh, there it is. I think I see it now.
Hey, then that's my mistake. Are you good now?
That's okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
See,
I can see now.
this
Look,
is why people
on
speak up.
4.
This is why
I'm
people
gonna
speak
have
up,
to
because
speak up.
this teacher doesn't always know what she's doing. Perfect.
No, you're fine, but I can't even find where to do the little typing, so I'll just yell out, okay?
Yeah, that is perfect. Absolutely. All right, so how do we think that this lesson would get used in your class? Is this some sort of an introduction lesson? Is it a review lesson? Where would it fall in maybe a series of things that you're trying to do? And Stephanie says maybe after a discussion about the legislative system. Yeah, so this is an interesting idea. If you're if you've been talking about the legislative system, then you want to have them do a little bit of research on their own with a real life concept that they would maybe have some knowledge of. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I thought too for my group, maybe just the beginning of immigration, just give them some.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need that.
Nancy had the same idea, just introductory. This is pretty basic, right? This is not some sort of culminating activity, but this is some sort of intro. Yes, absolutely, Shannon. That's what I thought somebody would say. I put that in here too. It's some sort of an intro lesson for an argument writing or a pro-con discussion. Yeah, because one thing that we notice about this lesson is that it's entirely pro, right? The argument is all on one side, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't change that, right? We can revise to add more and bring in the con. So we could balance that out. But absolutely right. This is a great way to introduce persuasive writing, pro-con, argumentation, and certainly an introduction to the legislative system. Very nice. Okay. What do you think about suggested time? Remember, when we're putting together a really nice lesson set, we would like a resource that we use to be reasonable in terms of how much time it's going to take from our students. So what do you think? In an intermediate class, NRS 3-4, if you did both page 22 and 23, maybe not every question in the Take It Further, I would assume you would choose several of those. About how long do you think this would take? This might vary depending on your group, but what do you think? Nancy's thinking maybe an hour, hour and a half. Yeah, agreed. Depending on how many of those research-based questions on page 23 you get into, if you stay away from those and just stick with covering the content, yeah, I think you could do it in less than a full session. Good. Anybody else with an idea about that? I think you're probably right there, Nancy. Certainly, if you're going to dig into some of those legislative issues, like look up your Congress people and writing to them, or research the immigration bill and where it stands in Congress, that's going to take way more time. And and Nancy points out a great idea. You can make some of that homework, right? It could be done out of class. And Jenny is laughing, and I'm laughing with her, because I'm looking at this and thinking, I could spend a week on this, right? Like I could go all day just talking, because there's so much rich information here. So definitely, Shannon, if you're going to add that research, you could extend this over multiple class sessions. And I think, too, the other point we want to remember is if we're going to use it as a writing prompt, there's not really a huge writing prompt here, although the letters to the congressman could be considered a good writing prompt. If we're going to build off a pretty big writing prompt off of this, that's going to take more time as well. So that definitely would have to be spread over time. Very good. Okay, now we get to the tricky part, which is standards. And you may not have your standards binder right in front of you, so some of this will come from your memory, from logic, and some of it we can look up together. So we know that we're aiming for NRS 3 and 4, those 2 levels. I want you to look at the text real quickly. The text is what's on page 22, the article, and help me decide whether we should aim for level 3 standards or whether we should settle on level 4. The difference is level 3 is grades 4 to 5.9, and the level 4 standards start at 6 and go to 8.9. I'm curious, just from your gut instinct, should we be going at the lower level standards or should we be looking at a little higher? What do you think?
It's Pat again. I'm thinking a little higher.
Okay, so you're thinking maybe the higher intermediate, which would be level 4. Okay, Nancy agrees with you. Got a couple of votes for 3. Yep. Yeah. This is good. I was hoping that we would get a mixed bag here because there are 2 different things happening here, and I want you to just draw your attention to the magazine and look with me. When you look at just the text and how maybe the complexity or the difficulty of the text, I'm guessing that you're leaning low, right? Lower standards, NRS 3. This is not complicated text, right? Then when you get over to page 23 and you're dealing with this political cartoon and some of those research questions and extended writing prompts, now we have to think, probably not level 3 standards anymore, but probably bumping to 4. So we actually have a mix of what's being asked of students. There are both level 3 standards in here and level 4 standards. And that is just something that you will start to learn in your gut, right? As you know these standards better, you'll start recognizing, oh, research, anything that's social studies specific, that's NRS 4. Things like finding main idea or summarizing, that's probably NRS 3. You throw in political cartoons, you're at level 4, right? So, and I know that because I've looked at this lesson like 50 times, but I've been learning how the standards build on each other. So that's the kind of thing we would recognize by looking at this lesson together is say, text is pretty low level, but some of these other issues are going to bump us up. So I'm going to make the executive choice, and we're going to go with NRS standards for level 4, not because there aren't some level 3 standards being covered. There are, but there are a handful that are going to bump us to 4. So that's where we're going to start, okay? So I'm curious if you would just think back to your standards proficient training and you look at some of the activities in the Take It Further section that students are being told to do. What kinds of standards are they being asked to meet? You don't have to give me the codes, but just kind of the key words. What are they being asked to do here in some of these questions? And I'll give you a second to think through that. And if it's easier to just speak than type, you can unmute yourself and jump in. Whatever is easiest is fine.
Hi, Anita. I was thinking analyzing.
Great. Okay, so we've definitely got some analysis happening. Okay, perfect. I see Tara has jumped in with summarizing data from a variety of sources. Okay, perfect. Those 2 actually go really well together. Summary and analysis could be happening. We have research/interpret information. Perfect. Good. Are there any other keywords that jump out at you guys? This is great. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of, yes, Shannon, thank you, the writing. I was wondering if anybody's going to bring that in. Yeah, and there are a lot of writing standards out there, right? So we maybe don't know exactly which one to settle on, but let me show you one that I think fits beautifully with things you guys have already said. Look at this one, 4WRB1. I've shortened it a little, but the idea is you conduct a research project to answer a question, and that's a writing standard, so it's in writing. So look here, we hit our research, that Jenny had mentioned, and then we've got Shannon's writing right here in the same one. Perfect. Okay, great. Let me see what else we've got in here. We have somebody at one time had suggested this using internet sites for research as a reading standard, because how are you going to do that research without without some sort of device, right? Getting on the internet. So that's one option. This idea of analyzing, summarizing data from a variety of sources, you guys are right on it. Look at this standard here for our CI9. Integrate information from different sources to build your understanding of a topic. That hits exactly of what you guys were after right here. Well done. Perfect. And then the other issue that was mentioned, one of the keywords that got mentioned but we haven't found yet, is this one here, which is, you see that keyword summarize? Finding main idea and summarizing. That's part of a standard here in 4R CI1. So if those are some of the big things that you saw just on first glance, and if you go digging through the standards, you will find 3 or 4 that pop right away that match with the things that you guys identified, which is awesome. Is there anything that we overlooked that you would want to add that you're like, oh, well, we didn't talk about this, and the students are definitely doing that? Anything like that? I'll give you just a second. Nancy, yes. Okay, so this issue of the social studies content, here's the good news. See these 2 standards that have the R, or the 3 that have the R in them? Remember, those are the social studies standards specific for reading and CI. We could have gone over a page to the 4RH standards, and we would have found the social studies specific standards, and they would have matched these pretty closely. Yeah. So Nancy, in her mind, she may be thinking, you know what? I don't want to concentrate on this so much as just generic text and how to analyze text. I want to analyze it from a social studies specific topic. She might substitute these standards out for the 4RH ones, which would be completely valid and would give her a chance to focus on some more of that content specific stuff. Absolutely, you're completely right. The only other thing I would just point out is if you're going to get into some of this thing we talked about down here about persuasive essays or argumentative writing, one thing that is a possibility, and I'll just throw this one out there, is this issue here of determining an author's point of view. If you wanted to take a real approach of, this is a very one-sided presentation of an issue, let's look at the other side, and you were going to bring in maybe a different article or a different cartoon that presented the other side, you could really hit 4RCI5 to talk about how the 2 authors' point of views differ. And where do you know the author's point of view? How do you know it's pro-immigration, etc.? That's one that could be integrated if you were going to use some of this persuasion and pro-con approach that we talked about. So I'll leave that one up there as well. Okay. All right. You guys did fantastic. We came up with a handful. I'll just give you a quick chance to say yes or no. Do you want to leave in the internet sites for research as one of your main targeted standards? Do you feel like that is being taught to students in this lesson? Or do you think this is tangential, just kind of being touched on? Leave it in, yes. Take it out, no. What do you think?
I would like to take it out.
Okay, we've got 1 vote for take it out. Anybody else? I'll wait for the backup here. Oh, there it is. All right. You guys win. I would agree with you. There's nothing in the actual lesson itself that encourages or teaches students how to appropriately search for information on the internet. If that guidance were in there, I would say that standard was being targeted. Instead, I would say students are using the internet. That's totally different, right, than targeting the instruction and teaching them how. So just so you're aware, that's the difference there, and I support you guys in taking it out. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 standards clearly targeted, and I'm going to put this one down here, the writing one at the bottom. We've got 3 reading and 1 writing standard. All right, so let's scroll on down. I took the kind of the jump ahead and filled in the quantitative measure for this article in advance of you. So I found on Change Agent's website this document right here. Can you guys see these reading levels here? This is for the issue that we have from the Change Agent. And I went down here to legalize undocumented immigrants, and I found this 8. You see it down there? That is a grade level. They are saying they measured the quantitative complexity of that article, and they came up with a grade 8, which means that our NRS 4 standards were actually appropriate, right? I will say I have run that article through a different readability tool, and it came out a little bit lower, more like a 6. So just so you're aware. But that does put us right around NRS 4. So what we want to do real quickly is identify which sections of the text are going to make it the most complex, right? Do you remember our rubric that we looked at that has the 4 different kinds of complexity: structure, language clarity conventions, knowledge, and purpose. And what we want to do is decide which of these is going to give our students the most trouble. Remember, that's the approach. Where are my students going to get hung up? So as you look just at the text now, not the cartoon right now and not the graph, but specifically the text, is there any of these 4 categories where you think students are going to find it more complex? I'll give you a second to think about that. Which of those categories do you think students will find complexity in this article? Nancy says possibly meaning and purpose. I would agree with you, Nancy. I'd be curious which ones you mean. Shannon's backing you up on that. I agree with you guys completely. I rated that also as moderately complex. Yeah, knowledge demands falls in that same category. Agreed. If they're not immigrants themselves or don't have an experience firsthand working with immigrants or talking to immigrants, they may not know a lot. But certainly the meaning and purpose, there is some work to be done here. Okay, very good. I agree with that. Do we think that the language and the structure then would fall under the slightly complex? Is that something that we could all agree on as a critical friends group, that we think those 2 are not too difficult?
Yes, that's what I thought also, that I didn't feel they were that difficult compared to the knowledge demands and the...
Oh, you guys are so good. Apparently I was reading your mind today, because that's what I thought too. We've got a pretty basic structure in that article. The connection between ideas is pretty explicit, easy to follow. And the vocab is very basic, and the conversational tone. If you read through the article, it's very conversational. And that's very convincing because it sounds like just somebody talking to you over coffee, right? But it doesn't make it very complex. So certainly, the other piece I think where knowledge demands and meaning and purpose will bump us is if you include the chart and or the cartoon. If you incorporate those pieces in, because many of the questions deal with both, you definitely have upped your knowledge demands and your meaning purpose to moderate. So agreed, those are probably the 2 areas where students might need some extra supports. Very good. Perfect. Okay, so vocabulary, let's talk very quickly about vocab. We could go through and identify all kinds of words that we think could be identified as useful in this lesson. But what I want to ask you is a more broad, kind of general question first, which is there any vocabulary support in this lesson? As it stands right now, is there any vocab support? Are students asked to work with vocab? Are they given vocab teaching? Is there anything at all that's going on here?
I'm really not seeing anything for
Yeah.
vocabulary support.
Okay. So Pat's saying, I'm not seeing it. What about the rest of you? What do you think about vocab support? Yeah. Seeing lots of big zeros, right? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't look like there's a lot of vocab support here. Now remember, who is this catalog, this magazine is supposedly targeting language learners and ABE and adult diploma classes at the intermediate level. Do you think those people need vocabulary help? In general, yes, right? It's one of the areas where our students need to grow the most. So if we were just to make a broad sweeping statement kind of across this page, Shannon's giving me the exclamation points like, oh yeah, students need vocab. This magazine, and I'm making a broad statement here, but if you flip the pages, you can just flip through and just glance. You are not going to find vocabulary supports in this resource. They don't exist very much. I mean, and when you start counting them, you can do it on one hand for the whole magazine. How many times a specific vocabulary word is taught, emphasized, defined, worked with. It's just not the target of this resource. So if we were going to say anything, we would maybe just write a broad statement across this page that basically says this resource does not provide enough vocab support for students at this level, right? Something like that. And then we could, because I did it, we could put in all these words that we think would be really important to teach, right? Like undocumented and legalized, like right there in the title. Students might not know those words. Words like deported or economics, they might need help with some of that. But this phrase right here is kind of our takeaway theme. This resource doesn't do this particularly well, okay? And that's just a good thing to note as we move forward. Some resources that your programs use do great vocab support, like fantastic, and then others just don't. And this is one of the just don't resources. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. That takes us to section 9, which is the focus of text-dependent questions. And this one is where we look straight to page 23, the Take It Further section. What we're going to do is look at each of those bolded words as a number, right? So summarize, that's question number 1. According to the author, that's question 2. You follow me? Research is 3. What do you think is 4? Understand legislative process is 5, and then interpreting the political cartoons is going to be 6. So if we think about those questions as numbered, and we look over here at these anchor standards, can you find any of our 6 questions on page 23 that you would say are being targeted or being asked of the students that matches up with one of these anchor standards? And this takes a little bit, so I'll give you a second to think. Any of the questions 1 through 6 on page 23, do any of them match up with one of these anchor standards and say, yes, the students are being asked to do that? And you let me know when you find a match. Okay, so question number 1, this issue of deals with integrating, meaning Anchor Standard 7. Is that what you're thinking of, Tara? Yep, perfect. Yep. So she's pointing out this one right here, focus on integrating. That's one of the standards that we chose on our first page. And there is a good possibility that we're probably going to have to write a question to make that standard actually fit. Because here's the problem. None of the questions that are in the page 23 actually ask them to integrate any of the information. They'll say, look at the cartoon, look at the chart, look at the text independently, but no question actually asks them to integrate and talk about information from more than one of those at a time. So if we want our standard from page 1 to get met, we're going to have to write a new question to match that, which is exactly right. Very good. Perfect. Shannon says she can see the second part of Anchor Standard 2. I can too, Shannon. That was one that I had noticed. Question number 2, the according to the author, deals pretty much with that same idea. Key supporting details. Why does he say this? Where do you see it? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and reading Anchor Standard 6, very good. This one is a possibility as well. How point of view or purpose? And she's saying that possibly question 6, meaning the questions about the cartoon. And what message is the cartoonist trying to convey? That's exactly right. That's question 6. Perfect. You see how that matches up with point of view, question 6, the part 3. Wonderful. So you guys get the hang of that, right? You remember how we did this. We're basically saying an anchor standard is only covered if the students are being asked to do something that makes them demonstrate that thing, right? So one thing that could happen, and I wrote this question and you guys can see what you think. I was looking at this integrating and evaluating content in diverse media, and I wrote this question down here, meaning they have to relate the article to the cartoon. How does the idea in the article relate to the message in the cartoon? That question specifically forces them to integrate information from 2 resources, whereas the other ones currently don't do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Remember, one of the things we're looking for is not just, is the standard kind of mentioned, but is the standard actually being met, right? In all the component parts of it. Terrific. Okay, so one thing that we notice is there are some things that don't show up on here, including writing standards, right? And so the writing standards do not appear here, and we know there are some writing standards being asked for on page 23, and that is great. And we would get to those as we got to the research. Wonderful. Okay, and I just want to encourage you, Shannon says she likes that new question, and I agree. And I will tell you that's a great example of it. Does not take very long to write your own questions that push your students just a little deeper, make them analyze just a little harder, and it wouldn't be that hard to add that question to that page of that assignment there at all. So it's a good reminder that we have plenty of resources that are in our brain to pull that kind of stuff. Remember the research. The issue is, does this activity allow for extra research? Can students who finish early have something to do? Absolutely. It's already in here, right? That's all over the place. And the writing activity, I will say, if you look at question 4 on page 23, the what do you think of the bill question? Just very quickly, what do you notice about question 4, which is pretty much the only writing assignment that we have built in here? What do you think of the bill? Look up your Congress people, write to them and let them know what you think about immigration reform. What do you notice about that question, that writing prompt? Just an observation maybe about it from a quick glance there. What do you notice about that what do you think question? Jenny makes me laugh. She says, on the high school equivalency tests, they don't care what you think. That's right. if we're thinking about prepping for high school equivalency exams, we do want to be careful about asking them their opinion too often. If we do ask them their opinion, we should follow it up very closely with, do you have any evidence to back up your opinion, right? We really need to be pushing them that way if we're going to ask for their opinion at all. But definitely we want to always make clear to them that when we are asking them an opinion, not every writing prompt will. So that's first thing. Nancy also points out that it gives a great opportunity. It provides a website, the whoismyrep.com, lets them get to know their local reps. Think about the practicality and the kind of just the civics lesson that's built in here, which is wonderful and rich. So you might want to rewrite that question to make it less opinion-based and more evidence-based, but it is a really rich opportunity for a writing prompt and would be wonderful to use. So I agree with Jenny. I would revise it to get them away from the opinion. Yeah, Shannon says it's not a text-based question, and that's exactly what we're after. As many of our questions we can make text-based, we should. Can we use opinion-based prompts to get class kicked off or to start a discussion or to help them make connections to the text? Yes. But if they're doing something like a 30-minute to an hour writing prompt, we really need to make sure that that is a text-based question. So it's worth the class time that we invest in it. And I think that's just a safe bet all around. So wonderful. Okay. First of all, you guys did fantastic on that. It throws us back to a little bit. I'm flipping through these slides because we did all this on our own. It throws you back to some of that lesson revision process that we did in our original standards proficient training. But what it's going to do is it's going to lead us at our face-to-face session. It is going to lead us to make some very sweeping revision suggestions to this whole resource. If we were thinking, I love this change agent and I would love to have that in my classroom, but what would I do to it to make it more standards aligned? Or what material would I need to add to it as a complement or a supplement to fill in the gaps that the change agent doesn't do well? All right, those are some of the questions that we're going to be asking together as we move forward. So you've got a quick interim activity. This is kind of like just think of it as homework, but it's not going to be overly taxing, I promise you. What I'm going to ask you to do is pick another lesson from the change agent other than pages 22 and 23 and do exactly what we just did together. Do it on your own. Do another lesson revision template just like the one we did and do it for a separate lesson in here. So pick any 2 pages that logically fit together, 2 to 3 pages maybe sometimes, that seem to have an article and a graphic and a picture, something that fits together as one lesson. It won't be compartmentalized because it doesn't say like lesson 1, lesson 2. So you kind of have to get a feel for where your lesson starts and stops. But I'll let you pick the page numbers that you're going to work with, and then you're going to do another lesson template. And Stephanie, yes, the lesson template is in Canvas. It is going to be right there in a Word doc, so you can open it, type right in it, and just resubmit it to me once you've saved it. Or you can email it to me, whatever's easiest. Yeah, it'll be right in there inside Canvas. The last thing that I will ask you to do, and this will not require a ton of time on your part, but I would ask that after the due date has passed, that you will go back into Canvas and look at a couple of the other participants' submissions other than your own, seeing their articles that they chose to review and some of the basic comments and revisions that they thought would be appropriate to make. And I want you to start drawing some patterns in your brain before we see each other next. What commonalities do you see between your lesson and some of your fellow participant lessons? What are some gaps, some of the same standards that are being covered, or maybe complexity issues? Looking for patterns. So that's what I will ask you to do, is review the other participant submissions. And there will be a page in Canvas that you can click to do that. And you can just open them up and read them right online in front of you. You don't even have to print them off. So that's what your quote unquote homework is between now and the next time. And I think I've got the dates in here for me. There we go. So I'd love it if you would have your particular lesson finished by April 1st, and that will give you a handful of days to go through and then look at some participants' submissions after that. Okay. So again, all those instructions and the blank template are all in Canvas. The other thing that I put in Canvas so that you can do the text complexity part is that reading guide that showed every article in this edition of the Change Agent and what reading level it's at. That's also in Canvas. So you don't have to run a readability on all your articles. You can look them up on there. So that's in there too as a little cheat sheet to make your life easier. So the next thing we'll do once you've done your intermediate work, aim for April 1st. That's a soft deadline, okay? Don't panic about that. But that would give everybody a little more than a week to glance at a couple of other people's submissions before we see each other on April the 12th, which is our first face-to-face component. And we'll be at Waubonsie Community College in Aurora. The information's all in Canvas, the direction, the date, the address, the time, the room number, all of that. And I do ask you to bring a copy of the lesson revision that you're going to do for your interim activity, to bring it with you to the face-to-face, so that everybody will come with the one that they wrote, the lesson revision that they wrote. Okay. The other thing I will just quickly say, because I know we've hit 7 o'clock on the dot, is if you're looking and trying to decide where your lesson should start and stop, and you're like, I don't know, are these 2 pages a lesson? Are these 2 pages a lesson? Shoot me a fast email. Tell me what page numbers you're thinking and say, is this a lesson? And I'll shoot you back and tell you yes or no. Okay, that way you don't have to feel like you're worrying or wondering if you're doing something right. But you can pick anything you want in the magazine. And remember, the whole goal is that we are starting to analyze this resource in its entirety and starting to make some broad recommendations for alignment that we would make with this resource. And we're using the Change Agent only because it's simple, it's cheap. I can mail it in a mailer really quick to everybody. But the lessons and strategies that we're using would be applicable to any text resource that you use in your program. And that would be the goal, that you'd walk away with some strategies for helping the textbooks that you guys use at your program, how to make them even stronger. So that's what we're aiming for. So strategy for interim activity, aim for April 1st, have your own done. And then in the next week or so, take a peek on Canvas and look at a couple of other people's, see what theirs looks like. And then when we meet on the 12th, we'll have a lot of material to work with. So any questions at all, you can stay online and chat with me real quick. Otherwise, you can check out Canvas and send me whatever emails you've got. And we're going to meet April the 12th, which sounds like a long way off, but it's really just a month. So thank you for spending your evening, or at least part of it, with me. It's a pleasure always to work with you guys. And I'm going to see you again on April 12th. But if you need me before then, just shoot me an email. All right, you guys, you can just hit the X at the top of your control panel, and it'll shut down the whole GoToMeeting platform, and you'll be on your way for the evening. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Anita, it's Pat. Can I ask you, the one that you did, is there a way I can get a copy of that?
Yep, I'm going to take that Word document that was on the screen, all filled in. I'm going to save it and put it in Canvas right underneath the webinar resources. There's a page called Webinar Resources. It'll be right in there. Yep, and you can just pull it up and print it off and look at it at your leisure there. Yep.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Good to chat with you again.
Okay, have a good week.
Same to you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.